Okay, so you're Kahlila Williams. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. Okay, so you're Kahlila Williams, a social justice activist, and I'd love to know a little bit about what got you inspired into social justice activism, and just advocacy in general.
Well, before I was mainly just doing advocacy for like within my school community, because when I joined my school, there was no Black Student Union, and I knew many of like my fellow peers, and as just felt like we could use that space. And so I worked to create the Black Student Union at my school. So I am the co-founder of my Black Student Union. And then over the past couple of years, um, I've just been working to sustain that club. Um, During my sophomore year, I personally had a experience with a school police officer where I passed out at a park during a school event, and I was accused of having a drug overdose, even though it was dehydration. So that led me to like really go on a path where I really started to focus on like whether everything my school police officer was doing was really to protect me or whether he was watching me in a different sense. Um, and yeah, so after that, I kind of was just like very wary of him, of like that situation. And it led to like me kind of not speaking out about it. I never really told anybody about it until I joined Students Deserve, which is an organization that works to make Black Lives Matter in and beyond schools. And with that organization, I had attended my first protest last summer, and then I kind of just began like evolving within the movement, participating, becoming a student organizer. I started the gala chapter at my school, and was able to get more people involved who are now organizers and facilitators, and as well like just continuing to do the work of defunding the school police.
That's great. And there's just so much, like, especially last summer, it showed a lot about the racial situation in the United States. And I think you said a lot of good things. And do you think that, based on your experience and what you've seen, do schools need school resource officers, or is there a better way to have school resource officers?
I definitely don't think we need school resource officers. A lot of people are questioning that maybe we could reform the school police officers. Maybe there's, training that we can implement, but we've done that for years. We've done that um, for years since it started, the school resource program, back when it started in Flint, Michigan, before it was even implemented in LA. And we've tried that even with our regular police officers for about years now, since because they're ever since the police departments have been, that institution has been founded, it's been racist towards Black people. So in LAUSD, Black students represent 8% of the population, but are 25% of the arrest, diversions, and citations. So we're policed like 5 times more than our population. And many people don't understand that with that comes a lot of trauma, a lot of harm, because not only are we now being policed outside of our school community, but now we're being policed inside of our school community. Some place that we might go as a way to get away from everything that's going on at home, or a place that we feel safe or comfortable, a place where we're just trying to learn. Um, so I definitely do think there's other ways, such as restorative justice strategies, that we can implement within our schools that would provide a better solution to safety for our students, other than school resource officers.
And there's a lot of schools, like even my school recently, they gave out a survey about school resource officers, and most parents still wanted them and said that they like help the school environment. But I think why do you think some people still see school resource officers in a positive light?
Well, I think that's based off of how our society runs. We're taught to normalize police as the only version of safety. We were given no other form of safety besides police officers. We were told that that was our best option. Even when we were being killed for it, even when we were being profiled for it, it didn't matter because that was the only way possible. It was normalized within our society. It started off as slave catchers, and now police are just modern day slave catchers. Black people never got that institution um, to where they could, process, like, they never had that time period with everything that has happened to really assess what was right and what was wrong until we noticed it.
Mhm.
But still, it's like, when you think about it, oh, my house got robbed. Who do I call? You call the police. But what are you calling them for? You're calling them after the situation when there's really nothing that they can do. The fact that society continues to normalize these police officers, especially in schools, because it's always going to be, well, what if there's a school shooting at my school? Well, in Parkland, when there was a shooting, the school police officer ran off campus, and when the trial came, the verdict was that he was doing the right duty because his job was to protect the school environment, which was the property, and not the actual students. So, with that, like, you can see, if there's a school shooting here, what evidence shows you that they'll be reliable to actually protect your student? There is none, because the evidence that we have is the evidence that they can run off a school campus and still not be charged. Um, and so, because of like our society normalizing um, police officers, people don't think otherwise. And when they do start to think, then that's when they're shut down for it. That's when they're looked down upon. Anytime you contradict societal's views, there's always going to be some type of argument, some type of like something that happens. And so in this case, that's exactly what happens when people start to think, well, are police really protecting us? Well, that's your only option. Who else is going to protect you? Who else is going to protect you when they respond 30 minutes in Black communities? It takes them 30 minutes to get here. And then when they get here, your case is probably never even reaches an evidence file. It's probably just locked away. So that's where, society really has to be able to look at it. If we know that from the many years that we've seen policing and, our institutions and how they run, we
Mhm.
have to really look at that and be able to come up with our own viewpoints of who really keeps us safe. When there's something going on, it's your community that keeps you safe. And so if your community had more resources, do you think that your community would be able to sustain higher to the point where you wouldn't need a police officer, to the point where you wouldn't have to worry about being victimized by either a school police officer or a police officer, if you personally had enough resources?
Yeah, I definitely think that, especially like this summer, there's been a lot of talk about reform versus like complete abolition and just different like approaches the to racism in general. And do you think that it, like with everything, especially like performative activism on social media and just the different ways that people have reacted to the events of the summer, do you think that, what do you think it would take for actual change to happen?
um well, there's people who still have their different understandings or, different viewpoints on how they view the police.
Mhm.
um I think it definitely starts with having conversations, um like, about police officers and reimagining public safety. um for me, like, for me personally, I've learned that conversations really can change a person's perspective and a person's viewpoint. If you sit down with a person for about an hour, maybe not even an hour, like, but like if you sit down with them and you take that time out of your day and you explain why you have this viewpoint and they explain why they have theirs, and you know, you guys might go back and forth for a little bit, but there's a purpose in all of that. And they might not see your viewpoint at the end of the day, but that is okay because you guys sat down and you were able to hear each other. So now you know, especially if you're an organizer, you know that if you know somebody else's perspective, you're able to find a argument for why they disagree, and that helps benefit you. So in the long run, it benefits both of you because now you can say, well, I talked to this person who has a completely different viewpoint on where we stand, and this is why. Now, what can we say to that? And so I definitely think that, you know, starting to have those conversations will get us into a point where, you know, people can normalize abolition. Of course, you know, we know how people have been reacting to defunding alone, and it's just, what, you want to defund the police? What does that mean? We're getting rid of the police. Who would protect us? It's not something that's going to come at the blink of an eye. But I do definitely think with the recent events of 2020, there's been a lot of eyes that have been opened about the perspective of reallocating resources to especially Black and Brown communities that have been marginalized for years, reallocating that resources so that they have actual resources within their community. Instead of investing so much money into policing, to the point where we see policing hasn't been the solution for Black and Brown people. So definitely those events have helped. It's also been a mix because for Black people, we're seeing Black death all over social media. We're seeing people who who weren't speaking out about Black death or trauma or anything, and now they're just like the world's renowned most trauma therapist, and like they're on social media like, oh yes, we need to get out in the streets, we need to say this person's name. But for us, seeing another Black death, especially with the vulgar pictures or videos that might be posted, it's awareness, but it's also, you know, be sensitive to what you post, be mindful about what you post, because it's also like, me as a Black girl, I don't want to see more Black death. Put a warning on it, something, because that, you know, it really affects us. But I definitely do think those events have really led to a point where people are starting to realize, for some reason, even though we know racism did not just start to exist in 2020, it existed way before that. But a lot of people are like, oh my God, there's systematic racism, there's institutionalized racism. Oh, in our schools, these books are whitewashed, and our students really aren't learning their culture and their heritage and their history. So
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of like points that are definitely right. And I definitely think that conversation is the first part because like so many people, they won't even listen to somebody who doesn't agree with them. And it's like, how are you going to convince more people if you can't even have a conversation? So I definitely agree that you're right about that. And as for some people who would refer to the Black Lives Matter protests as just like a bunch of like thugs or just like people like rioters and looters, what would you say in response to that, considering the events on January 6th? And they want to call it insurrection, but it was terrorism. So what do you think about that and the comparison?
well, we know that no matter where you look in society, white and Black people will be treated differently. And January 6th was a perfect example of that, because back in June, Black Lives Matter protests were marching down Pennsylvania Avenue, and before they even got to the Capitol building, they were met with armed guards, National Guards, police officers. They couldn't even get on the steps. And in this case, it was a known fact that Trump was hosting his rally. It was a known fact that people are angry and, agree with his viewpoint that the election was stolen, whatever, whatnot. But and it was known around social media that there was people who were planning on making an attack to the Capitol because there was group text messages surfacing, Facebook groups, all types of things. But but our nation's government decided that, we wouldn't be prepared for those instances. And so we saw completely, that difference. But what I would have to say to, I guess, to not to those events, but to that overall like viewpoint of you saying Black people who were out in the streets were rioters and looters.
Mm-hmm.
Why is there any difference from what happened at that Capitol building that makes you see the Black people as rioters and looters or whatever you want to call them than what happened at the Capitol? It's only because of their skin color. And when Black Lives Matter held their protest during the summer, the people who were truly there for the protest, truly there to honor the lives that had been lost, to protect Black lives, weren't the ones that were breaking into stores. And yes, we acknowledge that it happened, but that was not us. And we can't control everything that happens in society. But it was clear what those white supremacists went there for that day on January 6th. They went to take over the Capitol. There's videos that have, surfaced everywhere. They went to take over the Capitol. Some even were trying to take council members hostage and had plans for that, to kill Mike Pence or hang him, whatever. They had that plan. That was planned out way ahead of time. Mm-hmm. And so definitely I would agree with you. That was terrorism. That was an act of terrorism. Those were terrorists. But when you saw the news headline, it was Trump supporters taking over the U.S. Capitol. It wasn't until the next day that those headlines started to change to acts of terrorism against our U.S. Capitol. Different headlines. But when it was Black people in the streets, of course you got a different headline. It was Black Lives Matter protests have turned into riots, have turned into this, have turned into that, because they're, that's just how society works. That's clear white supremacist at its finest.
Yeah, definitely. And even when I was watching it live, it's like, this is really where we live. Like, this is really like what, like, you think that, like, especially the way that they teach in school, it's like that this is history, but no, it's the present too. And there are like kids who are growing up and seeing this on the news, and they'll probably remember that day and know it as the nation that we live in. And also, you're in the class of 2021, correct?
Correct.
So you're graduating this year. Where do you see yourself in 5-10 years? What would you like to see for yourself and for the world in 10 years?
Of course, by then, probably have like gotten further along with, my college education. Mm-hmm. And I definitely have looked at the different options of, getting into like politics and social activism, stuff like that. For me, I'm not personally interested in becoming a lawyer. I feel like there's too much restrictions with that. I'm not a person where if I have I'm not going to, defend somebody who's guilty. I'm not going to be able to stand in court and hold my tongue and not be able to say what I want to say. So that personally for me, I will be continuing my activism. I will be in the streets still, speaking out to what is right and what is wrong. So I do intend on definitely continuing that. Um, I hope to start my own nonprofit um, for women and children of domestic violence. Um, so I will hope to, have that space where they can come not only for like shelter, but food, education services, support systems, different things, as well as I who might be looking into ways of like becoming a congress person, maybe, but I definitely know that I may not know what I exactly wanted to do, but I know that I will definitely continue to speak up for my community, for the Black community, speaking up for what is right and wrong, um, and that, yeah, that's pretty much it.
That's really inspirational because I think that's exactly the kind of people that the world needs and that we just need in general. And lastly, if the whole world was listening to you in this moment, what would you say to everyone?
I would say that now is the time for this country to change. It is time that we start to really look at the reimagining public safety and investing in Black communities. The over policing of Black communities needs to stop. We need to start looking at options, um, different options for public safety, which can be restorative justice. It is okay to contradict societal's views. It is okay for you to say that just because it is not normal doesn't mean that it is not right. The Jim Crow laws were normalized, but those were not right for Black people. Slavery was normalized, and that was not right for Black people. We see how society has normalized things against Black people, and police are just another form of that. I would encourage everyone to look at different views, especially restorative justice, as a way that we can implement within our communities. Look at reallocating money that we fund to police officers, school police officers, and investing in our communities and our community schools, making sure that Black people are being invested in, whether it's in schools or outside of schools, and that we're promoting Black awareness.
Those are all very powerful messages. And thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to have this conversation. And I think I really learned a lot and so much more than I could learn from a history book or a news station. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you for reaching out.
You're welcome. And that's it. I guess I'll end the meeting and I hope you have a great day, Kahlila.
You too. Thank you.
You're welcome.